Yes, I am Anne-Françoise. I am a philosopher among scientists, and I am a philosopher among artists too. And I am a philosopher who would create a new style in philosophy, a philosophy with philosophies and not in a particular philosophy. So for this, we need a generic space, generic for the multiplicity of philosophies. And you see in the course, we have to talk on the multiplicity of disciplines and of the philosophies. Yes, I work in collective intimacy. Collective intimacy is a concept who was created by ethnopsychiatrists of the third generation. First, Georges Devereux, two, Toby Nathan, and third, Avner Perez, Lucien Unpatin, and Henny Wetzler. So, with the concept of collective intimacy, we can collaborate with the idea that we can transform ourselves by the relationship with other colleagues, because I do not search a philosophy who is better than the other. I know that other philosopher works now with very different hypotheses that mine. I think I am in an adventure, but this adventure is very value. And with collective intimacy, our opinions are changed in position. So is it not a war between the opinions? We create a network with several disciplines and with several persons. So it is the value of the course. The concrete was chosen for this course because materialism. I think materialism is an abstract name. How it is possible to think concrete with materialism? It's a problem. I think there is a notion very important to construct the concrete. It is the encounters. Concrete, the etymology is Latin, cresco and cum. I grows with amalgam, with other. It's not a fixed idea as in common sense, but it is a dynamic. Yes. So with the collective intimacy, I invite Joevenn, who made a master about philosophies without foundation, and particularly Laruelle and I, and Tony Yanick. We collaborate for a long time. And if I am a little known in America, it is with the translation of Tony Joevenn and Jeremy Ross Smith and Bryn, I think, too. Yes, yes, thank you very much. Donc, I have acknowledgements with a lot of people, and I think these acknowledgements are part of my work. So. Bon. In CI, collective intimacy. You saw the syllabus and the first approach to the concrete, which goes by amalgamation, such as concrete, le béton en français. Why a course on the concrete? Apparently everyone knows what is concrete. The best shared knowledge would say Descartes. All suffering, all unpleasantness are felt as concrete. What is negative, what is obvious to us, we feel as concrete. This means that it is there, that we cannot do much about it, even if this concreteness is the consequence of our actions. Our obligations also send us back to the concreteness of our life. For what is positive in our life, it is not at all so clear that it is concrete. The positive supposes a construction and a dynamic that negation does not know, when, in the common sense, it ends up being reduced to fixed points. Let's see Spinoza ethics. Passions give themselves, but joy supposes a complex geometrical construction and change in the knowledge. On the other hand, common sense knows little about the dynamics of concrete because this cannot be observed directly. But the original sense of concrete is dynamic. The question of concreteness has been emphasized recently in philosophy. Excuse my English is not fluent, but it is so. Yeah. Chronologically, by Russell, two examples very important. The tobacco packet. He was Hegelian, as all English philosophers in the end of the 19th century. All philosophers were Hegelian. And Russell said he bought a packet of tobacco, and when he has this tobacco in the hand, he said, oh, this tobacco exists. I am not totally Hegelian. And another, this is in the autobiography, and it is another anecdote in my philosophical development. And this anecdote is that when he accepts the theory of external relations, the principle of external relations with Moore to quit the monism, he said, now I can believe that grass is really green. In Hegelian system, it was an appearance. So Russell, in this system, admit a concrete, independent of the philosophical thought. And it is a very important consequence that for Russell, ethics is not a field of philosophy. Philosophy is general. Philosophy creates possibilities as logic, but ethics is the field of the complicated facts of the daily life, and it is no relationship between them, just one relationship that we have in ethics to admit the idea of Spinoza to conserve the life. So with Russell, we have the first relationship with the concrete, independent of philosophy. And Tony Yanick creates a place for the text. I will add a text on Russell made for an encyclopedia of anthropology, not published now, and Tony would share this text on Russell, who is short, seven page, but I think there is importance for the concrete. Russell creates a tribunal, Russell Tribunal, it's very concrete. He bought all his library, his meubles to McMaster University to have the money to create the Tribunal Russell in the period of Vietnam War. So ensuite, another philosopher, I think to Katerina Kolosova. Katerina Kolosova thinks that in philosophy, man, woman, animal are abstractions. So it is necessary to think them differently and to modify in this geste the practice itself of philosophy. The search of the concrete is that of the limits of philosophy. Is very interesting. And now it is a PhD made by Annelise Dauphiné-Morer on the intention in human and in animals who used the idea of Katerina Kolosova. So it is important, it is concrete. And it is another philosopher, François Laruelle, wanting to think philosophy by and in philosophy leads to illusion, even hallucination. In order to have a more concrete access to philosophy, let's get acquainted with by conjugating with another type of thought. First, the science thinks like philosophy. You know, Heidegger said the science does not think as philosophy. Now for François Laruelle to know philosophy, we have to use another discipline. philosophy does not understand only by auto-modeling, as in tradition. So the quantum for Laruelle allows to get rid of natural and naturalistic representations. It's not possible with classical mechanics. So he chose a science where the concepts are operators and states and not representation. And the generic is taken as an Occam's razor of abstraction. So there are ways for concreteness for the philosopher. There are fictions, there are modeling, there are experimental texts. I create experimental text in the question of evaluating GMO with scientists. These experimental texts are in this book, who was published in August, with Yvan Ebel in October. We have this book. And with Oliver Schlott, we have recently this book. So that is intimate collectivity. So, alors, by the fiction, which allows to prolong the philosophy by other means and other disciplines, while conjugating it with lived and orientation not foreseen by the philosophy. It is not the only way to go from philosophy to concreteness, but it is one of the ways to manifest concreteness to philosophy. I create a fiction. We were lecture at the end of this course. To deal with the concrete from the philosophy, we need a device, which we will describe with the help of hypothesis. Hypothesis in philosophy was not very developed. It is Leibniz and Russell. But hypothesis was for mathematics in principles. But I use hypothesis in philosophy because I consider not only the trajectories in philosophy, for example, Plato, Spinoza, Nietzsche, Deleuze, it is a trajectory, but the principle of the multiplicity of right of philosophies. The multiplicity of right of philosophy. I work with this idea, not one trajectory, special trajectory. I can put Plato, Spinoza, Kant, Poincaré, Laruelle. No. I will not describe my position with a trajectory. I am in philosophy and I love all the philosophies. All the philosophies. So, to continue, we must first explain our assumptions about philosophy in relation to other disciplines. These assumptions have been developed in other courses with Tony and Joevenn, but also in philosophical scripts. We think after Leibniz and Russell that hypothesis is important in philosophy. Basic hypothesis. I will give you the text of this course on the place of Shah. No problem. No problem. Basic hypothesis. 1. The multiplicity of right of philosophies with the principle of generosity. It is possible to pass from a philosophy to another. And a principle of non-exclusion. No philosophy has precedence or supremacy over others. Generosity and non-exclusion. 2. The multiplicity of regimes of science. Disciplinary, non-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, with the considerations of models and modeling. 3. The multiplicity of forms of art. Alors, these are basic hypotheses on multiplicities, but there are with basic hypotheses for common equal X. Why common equal X? Because if we have only common without unknown, he can be a common as a suprematist group. We have to add to common an X to exclude the interpretation very, very terrible. Alors, for the hypothesis for the common equal X, I propose 1. Language is never used in isolation. Idem for color, idem for equations, etc. 2. Interdisciplinarity is not only a consensus on the meaning of words, but it is an implementation on the real. 3. Common equal X requires an implanted axiom, a sort of relation with the real, as I said tout à l'heure. 4. Art, science, philosophies should not only be seen as languages, but also understood as operators or as objects, alternatively. For example, it is no philosophy of science. The of is bad, but philosophy science or science philosophy. One is operator, the other the object. It's another syntax of the problems. With Alice Lucy Recab, we develop an art philosophy and now a philosophy of art. 5, we can use each of our disciplinary knowledge as an operator on another. And there are 2 basic methodological concepts. 1, the integrative object. An integrative object is an object without synthesis. In the actual currently sciences, there are a lot of objects without synthesis. A lot of objects. For example, obesity. It is impossible to reduce all the aspects of the research on obesity in one discipline. But it is a lot of knowledge whose synthesis is not possible. And we have to integrate this idea in the science as incertitude and unknown was introduced in sciences. This changed the methods. And the second basic methodological concept is generic space. It's not exactly a concept. It is a process. There are not direct relations between disciplines, I think. We need a generic space to pass from a discipline to another, from a multiplicity to another. Alors, hypothesis on the concrete. The idea of encounters in the very immanent gesture of philosophy. We can see the invention on philosophy with the immanent gesture who creates the philosophy. We made an intervention of the experience of the philosopher in the philosophy. And I think we can introduce this in all disciplines. The question of the concrete cannot be treated without generic procedure. Otherwise, we are left with the common sense. The best child would say Descartes, but also the most fixed, making difficult the dynamics. See the text translated by Joevenn Neo, we can put in the place why the generic. Generic is a new mode of visibility, independent from the disciplines, but with them. Generic is a necessary passage to grasp the concrete in philosophy, sciences, and arts. First, naive, without the generic, approach to the concrete. For philosophy, what is concrete is a factum that gathers in one point a philosophy, the world, for Husserl, the text, for Derrida, the life, for Michel-Henry, the ordinary, for the English, the universe, etc. The concrete is what escapes abstraction and is not identified with the empirical. Concrete and empiric are not the same. I think Joevenn would develop this point. To make the philosopher see the concrete, we need a method, a decomposition of philosophy, allowing us to see its limits, to take the factum just as a dimension rather than the virtual center of philosophy. Another approach of the concrete in philosophy is to consider it as a fusion of opposites or contraries on the condition of having a point of exteriority. It is too an unexpected encounter. The decomposition consists in cutting the links between the a priori and the empirical, and in considering them both as relatively autonomous. The transcendental then manifests itself as a dynamic link and thus relatively concrete, since it grows with the a priori, the concept, and the states of affairs. When we break down philosophy, we see that it is very difficult to place the concrete. It is what dynamizes their interaction. The concrete is not the sensible, put at distance by Plato. For him, the forms are concrete and modify the philosophy's thought, but also the texture of the world. Our proposition is that the concrete is not confused with the real, but allows to relate philosophy to the real. Between the decomposition of philosophy and the real, there are the functions of the concrete. It is a radical proposition. because with it renders no more possible as concrete philosophies as think they can find the real at the end of their reasoning, at the end of the line, as Deleuze, for example. To decompose philosophy supposes that the real precedes philosophy and allows it to be treated as an integrative object, that is to say, without a definitive synthesis. The philosophies that seem to co-create the real obviously continue, but if we look for the concrete, they become a neutral material for the construction of a concrete by fiction model experimental text. If philosophy as a dynamic can understand the concrete is not limited to the ground of philosophy, but participates in a ground that it does not now, but which is necessary to it. One of these aspects is the introduction of the philosopher's experience in philosophy. Is a field for philosophy. It is a text, the introduced text of the course would be take in the place, informatic place too. Philosophy to become manifest needs the other disciplines. Its concreteness is made in its dynamics with other disciplines. What is concrete for the science? Naively, the concrete escapes the structure, individual X, which is not confused with an individual noun by the structure, or else it is the structure itself. If it escapes the structure, it is the remainder, what of the empirical of the experience cannot be introduced in the structure. Russell developed this. It is what escapes mathematical or physical precision. It is the structure itself, as if nature were written in mathematical language. The concept and the intention allow the movement or the motion of concrete. Models and modeling are two constructions of the concrete in science. Tony Yanick would develop that topic. Applied science, misunderstanding of the concrete. The applied science is in its practice often more distant from the concrete than the theory. It supposes a fixation of the scientific concept and the use as a technique, whereas the theory can grow, sometimes even thanks to the technique. For the art, the concrete is the point of balance of an oscillation, just the point where the whole work seems to hold. A fixation always impossible, loss of balance and equilibrium. Ivan Ljovic Ebel, or a singular combination of materials, bodies, and linea serpentinata, Alice Lucy Recaba. With the generic, we can construct a common equal X between all these apprehensions and construct fiction to render compatible all these approaches. This supposes a decomposition by hypothesis of philosophy, arts, and science, allowing to articulate them in a new way. The new way now are introduced by Tony and Joevenn. Now, thank you.
So this is, you'll have the text, we'll post the text. I posted it on the chat. There's a document, there's a drive. But this text introduction that Anne-Françoise just read, we will be posting at the end of the session. So if there's anything we want to circle back on, but there's a lot to kind of unpack here. The proposal here is like every session that we have. But I want to open up the ability for you all to respond to Anne-Françoise about maybe your just confusions about what we might do, or what the relationship between abstract concrete is, or maybe you have a specific question that you want to bring that's based in your own work that you want to bring to the table. But before we move into more lectures style stuff, open it up to you all if you want to respond, add a comment, anything.
Yeah, feel free to bring up questions of clarification. I mean, if like questions of like abstract and concrete is a very like philosophically heavy, you know, thematic, and if you feel like you haven't really been exposed to any of these like types of thought, and you want a little bit more clarification and stuff like that, or anything that Anne-Françoise said that was like, you know, unclear to you, like feel free to just bring it up, and then we can move on to the lectures in a bit. But yeah.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
Perfect, that's what we want.
Cool. I was just curious about the distinction between the concrete and the real. I think it was said that you know, the real is traditionally considered as something that's reached at the end of you know, at the end of an argument or the end of a line of reasoning. But I'm interested, I guess, in just that difference, I guess, between the real, which I would probably think of as, you know, the kind of ground, like a ground for thought, something that that kind of escapes philosophy, but nonetheless informs it, and the concrete. Well, yeah, I guess just curious as to how you would describe the difference between the two.
Yes, this is a very important question. But if we put together, identify real and concrete, there is a great problem. Because we will have a lot of real. We need an idea of real very generic without interpretations. And after we can construct an order with concreteness, very plural. If we give a concrete interpretation of the real, it is immediately a war of interpretation. My real is that, and your real is other. I accept the human rights. You accept the Sharia. We can have an interpretation of real that integrate a particular interpretation, because we cannot not more discuss the multiplicity of interpretations. It's immediately a war. A Kampfplatz, said Kant. Kant see very, very good this. So I put as la ruelle first the real, very generic, human, and the world with the subjects. But human is not a subject, but subject can be a human. And human, it is evidently woman, man, etc. So what is the reason of the difference of real and concrete? Concrete is just in the world. We can in our life a distinct concreteness, and this concreteness has something intimate, what is not the totality of the real. Accept you this explanation, Zain.
I'm struggling with it a little bit, but I think I've understood that the I think I understood what you said about the real. If you begin to talk about it, it becomes a war of different interpretations, and there isn't necessarily a place to meet. So is it that the concrete is that place to meet if the real isn't? Or have I misunderstood?
I would just like to, yeah, I would just like to kind of pick up here. I mean, I think the one thing she was trying to say, from my interpretation, I could be also wrong, because this is, yeah, but is, yeah, what you were going off here is then is the real as being, for her, I mean, the real cannot be experienced as totality, like as a whole, right? And also it isn't, like we can't speak of the real as one thing. It's kind of like this fractured thing, but when they're not, it's not equal to the concrete also is not technically the totality of the real. It might be an implementation of perspective, a particular intention on the real or towards the real, or experiment. So I think the concrete is like in a way, what I guess what you're saying, I think it can like kind of piggyback off of what you were assuming, and it's sort of like mode of implementing abstract ideas is a concrete step towards the real or something. Does this make sense?
Yeah, that's useful. Thank you.
And also the disentangling the abstract and the concrete is going to be constantly the conversation. So that question will be brought up by many times. Any other?
There are a lot of concrete example in Kant. For example, we can attendez. Kant said that we can take the beer out of the bottle, but not put it back in. It is a lot of example of this type in Kant. And I am reading a thesis, a very high-level thesis on theory of judgment and aesthetics. And it is in annex a text, a conference of Paul de Man on Kant. And he said that Kant is not in front of beauty and in front of the sublime, an intimate sentiment. Is just exterior. And the example, this type of example will contribute to this exteriority.
Can you clarify for me something about this thing you said about Kant, about the bottle? This image, is that because he does not see the two-way communicate? Is not a two-way road? It doesn't go both ways. Is that what he's saying? Okay. Or do we have any other comments, questions? Anything is accepted here. We will happily take a try at any question or suggestion. And let's let me clarify also, like the way she was describing that the way that we trying to practice this work is that we specifically and purposely try to create more, very diverse group of disciplines, and we want all of us to kind of encounter each other using our own kind of perspectives and see how they can sort of like adjust. So like, for instance, I know Bryn's coming from a mathematics background. So if you want to, I mean, if you had something specific, because this is not a mathematics course or whatever, I just want to say this, sorry to call you out, but feel free to bring these questions in there, because
no, I actually I do have a question that's somewhat related to mathematics. Anne-Françoise, you said you made a comment about Spinoza in terms of the conservation of life. I have a question, like, is that related to, for instance, I know a little bit about that in Spinoza, but is the way that you phrased it as a conservation of life makes me think of the like conservation of energy and the debates around materialism in the conservation of energy. Is that like a sort of reference to those debates in the like between like Mach and energy and the like caloric versus a sort of atomistic version of the conservation of energy?
I think the idea of conservation of life for us all is just a direction, a very, very abstract principle to interpret the complexity of daily life, I think. But we can perhaps construct another system with the relationship between conservation of life, conservation of energy, and I think it was made by philosopher of sciences. I think we can when we take these problems, the question is it is an identification process between conservation of energy and conservation of life. This is the Deleuzian method. Oh, are these conservation very distant? Or very identical, but not identification? This is the method of Laruelle, explained in theory of identities. We have alternatively a strict separation or an identity. The classical philosophy opt souvent for an identification.
Thank you. That's a interesting connection between the identification.
Between Mach and atomistic version of energy. Yes, 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 we can create this. A world with atoms, a world with continuity. Poincaré has developed this continuity and atomistic view, where in this first writing an hypothesis, and in the end of his life, atomistic was real, concrete. But first, it was an hypothesis.
Julia, everybody has introduced themselves, and I was wondering if you wanted to introduce yourself to us.
Sure. Apologies for being late, actually. Yeah, so my name is Julia, and I'm a PhD candidate at ASCA, the Amsterdam School of Cultural Analysis. My PhD project is on the epistemic function of art institution in the age of climate change. And what I'm interested to study is the intersection between aesthetics, epistemology, and politics in a post-anthropocentric reality, or in post-anthropocentric imaginaries. So particularly, I'm investigating how disciplines intersect when we approach the climate discourse, and how the aesthetic experience can have an epistemic function, and how we can bridge the long discussed gap between natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, and the arts.
Awesome, thank you. In that case, we don't have much time, so I'll go straight to my presentation, and then Tony will go into his presentation. But I try to address a little bit about what Julia's concerns are. So share screen. How do I share screen? Okay. Can everybody see my share screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to talk about the abstract and the concrete a little bit. I'm going to give an overview of the course in general. In the next session, I'm going to talk quite a bit about the philosophical aspect and the philosophical history of abstraction and concretion. So the overview of this, well, there are many reasons to think about the problems of abstraction and concretion. In philosophy, there's a large historical tradition devoted to inter and intradisciplinary debates about abstraction and concretion. A lot of this involves the relationship between philosophy and mathematics. At its core, the problem of abstraction and concretion involves the problem of unification, i.e., how different types of things, ideas, concepts, experiences, time, space, etc., can / ought to be unified. And so all these internal debates lead to different types of unification, So the types of unification we choose depends on how we understand problems related to abstraction and concretion, as well as our commitments to understanding, quote unquote, the world. So what I mean simply is that in the history of philosophy, how we derive these notions of abstraction and concretion gives us, it doesn't give us, it allows us to construct a view of how things I can come to be identified with each other, what things are determined as or determinable as, an identity. And the way in which we also presume, or like the premises that we have about abstraction and concretion, also ultimately hinges on like what type of commitments we have, like how we want to describe or like construct a thought or a vision of what we want to understand as the world. So I hope that's somewhat simple to understand. So the philosophical aspect, debates about how things in philosophy, yeah, so the debates about how things can be made abstract, how they can be made concrete, undergirds the premises of how we understand the notion of a materialism, of projects regarding empiricisms, etc. So what I mean by this is that in the next session, especially, I'll talk about identification and unity in terms of like abstraction and what it does. How philosophers are like saying, no, we don't actually want abstraction. Some do want abstraction as a means of like identifying things. All of this, all of these like things that underplay each other allow us, they really undergird the premise of how we come to understand what materialism is. So I think like my strategy here is to try to provoke you by saying like, okay, so one guiding thread on this seminar focuses on whether materialism and empiricism are the same thing, or whether they're antagonistic to each other. But if they're complementary to each other, how would they be? How could they be? And with this guiding thread, I think I'm gonna try to like explicate the notions of the abstract and the concrete, which has huge and dense philosophical history and debates. Okay, so that's just an overview of what we'll do in the whole course. I mean, for the philosophical aspect of it. So now what I'm going to talk about is the collaborative aspect of this course. So despite the occasional philosophical heavy aspect of my contributions to this seminar, the nature of this entire seminar, which includes everybody, all the participants, and the nature of the problems that we pose should be understood as contributing to a collaborative set of problems. So what I mean is really, really simple. These set of problems are posed collectively and collaboratively in the sense that they ultimately respond to problems of a much simpler nature. So my example here is this. For example, if the problem of climate change worries us, and if it seems like the fossil fuel industry remains an immovable in the financial sense, in the political sense, in the social sense, in the legal sense, etc., etc. If the fossil fuel industry remains an immovable force, then are there any other measures that we can take to resolve / address the perils of our problem of climate change? So let's just say that, for instance, what is going on right now? Let's say climate change is affecting, let's say everything, right? In short, but for some reason, there's just no possible way for the fossil fuel industry to change. I don't know why, or I don't know how, but like, let's just say there's so much power that's just impossible completely to, change the way that they invest in geography, change the way that they invest in the financial aspect of it, in the lobbying aspect of it, in the political aspect of it. If this is all impossible, what does that mean that we're doomed? So this is what I'm trying to like. This is what I mean by responding to problems of a simpler nature. A simpler nature simply means that there are questions that are, in some sense, more naive, right? In some sense, more communal. In some sense, more explicit to us. And this is the only reason why we try to philosophize, to resolve the problems that we think are explicit to us. So I'm going to continue the example, right? In this example that I just gave, we presume that the perils of climate change is an ongoing action. That right now, there is still action being done in fracking, in political lobbying, in moving money around, disregarding people's geography, etc. So we presume that the perils of climate change is an ongoing action, vested by financial, infrastructural, political, social, etc. forces. And we also presume that the governmental or political action is failing us in its response to the actions of the fossil fuel industry, or as capitalism writ large. So can we develop or seek a philosophy of action that is equivalent in both governmental terms and under terms of mitigating climate destruction qua the actions of capitalism? Like, this is all a giant example. It's a giant example of bringing questions that we have and using the philosophical aspects and methodologies to resolve something that is seemingly explicit. So these questions are simple and perhaps almost naive, but they are posed in good faith with regards to how they occupy communal problems, i.e. problems that exist beyond me, problems that exist beyond my singular set of practices or beyond my singular like discipline, how they can be resolved, how they can resolve this problem. So problems that exist outside my field, problems that exist simply outside what I know I can do, etc. So communal problems should lead us to collaborative questions. By this, I mean specifically, well, in this particular case, it's just an example, right? But I mean like understanding how accounts of abstraction and concretion and philosophy can enable different types of practices within a scientific or political domain dealing with communal problems. Yeah. If this is unclear, like, let me know. I'll give the time for you to ask questions. And so, like, one possible way to accomplish this is through the conjugation of ethics within the practice of science, etc. Let me give another example. If like anybody has like read much of Rorty, a huge part of Rorty's works, Richard Rorty, the American philosopher, a huge part of Rorty's works deal with how for some reason like politics in Rorty's works is more important than philosophy insofar as as if like political questions can resolve the problems that philosophical questions cannot, questions like justice, etc., etc. And so for Rorty, politics, especially jurisprudence, like law, for him, like we should treat jurisprudence as if it were a philosophy of action, wherein the way that we can identify how the law ought to act ought to be made commensurable practically to the virtues of I guess civil justice or something like that. So by philosophy of action, I mean, a set of domain of like practices that in this sense can be translatable, but must be made explicit. So that is only one way. That is like really only one way of like, thinking about these problems. And in continuation of collaborative continuity, yeah, so this is a part of like a triptych of course. This is the third course that Anne-Françoise, and Tony, and I have taught together. And all of it involves, in effect, talking about mostly the same things, about not talking, but like practicing the same things, about a type of invention of the concrete. And I think, yeah, we're gonna keep working on this in this seminar, based on the problems and concerns that all of you have brought up. So yeah, I'm gonna stop here and open for questions because I know I haven't been very clear altogether.
I have a quick question. You spoke about how the like, or speculated about the sort of equality of like, or equivalence, sorry, of like materialism and empiricism, and I'm just I'm curious as to whether or not, or like to what extent empiricism for you relies on the abstract.
Empiricism?
Yeah, like to what extent does empiricism rely on abstraction?
Yeah, no, this is a very big question. In the next session, I'll talk about Berkeley, but there's a huge push against abstraction within the domain of empiricism, because empiricists believe that our experiences that the question of like unification of experience requires a different type of measure than anything like the rationalists can provide. And so, and because of this, like there are many different, like Locke is very different from Berkeley is very different from Hume, and all these empiricists are different from like later empiricists. But so, by empiricists, like, so, okay, in general, like empiricism simply is defined as whether you can know things from experience. That's all empiricism, like as a general category, means. And so the question is like, how can we come to know things? Is experience like a valid, ground in which we can come to unify thought, etc., etc.? Like, how does thought come in relation to experience, etc.? And so these like lead to big debates where for some thinkers, the privilege of experience must mean abandoning materialism. And for some others, it must mean making them commensurable. But they're always implicated in each other, and that's one of like the stickiest things, where how can you think about a materialism without experience? And so that's like the real like underlying contention that goes on that I hope to like make clear. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to thinking more about that. Yes.
One more question before I turn to Tony, if there are any. If not, I can just. Okay, I'm gonna turn the mic over to Tony.
Okay, so my task today is to, what we have done in the past is we've presented a lot of theories and a lot of methods and implementations, ways to go about doing these things, which seem at the time or many times very abstract. And the main, let me see how that shows, sorry. Joevenn, how do you share?
You click
Share
share
screen. It's right in the middle. It's gigantic. Host disabled participated. I can't do the screen sharing because I'm not a host because I left and came back.
I'll share your screen.
I'm sorry,
Hmm?
Tony, did you say you're not a host?
I think I'm not. I think because I left and came back, and you make me a host again. real
Yeah,
quick?
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. There we go. Is it working now?
Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
Give me a second. It's telling me I have to grant access. Sorry, should have done this before. Share my screen. Share. Now it's my fault. I can't. There we go. Okay, so the very useful, at times conflicting idea of fiction is kind of this method that we propose that we want to practice throughout the sessions of the course. So this is sort of like trying to walk you through a general introduction as to like what we all will do as a group, what we'll ask all of you to do after every session, so we can have more of a discussion. So I'm just trying to think of like then, and to be fair, this is my interpretation of fiction coming from Marvel. It could be slightly different, and I also take in some other references. But we hear the field of fiction, right? The Marvel's like genre of thinking. It's already revealing. It already sets off at the helm of it that there's already a entirely fictional nature of all philosophy, right? But for him, this is specifically a revolutionary tool, right? Where fiction, for instance, will use philosophy itself as a material, philosophy as a raw material in its fictions. Photofiction uses aesthetics as raw material, and these things. Specifically, when we're talking about fiction, we're not just talking about, although you hear a lot, you will hear some, because I like to write them, and Anne-Françoise does as well, like these sort of narrative fictions, right? But really the passage, or Anne-Françoise calls the trip of fiction, it occurs through progression and relation as it goes, right? that there's not, so a lot of times images don't appear, but events are there. There are always events. The events are kind of like the points that you follow. So taken from Robin McKay's translation of Last Humanity, you can find like an actual, probably the closest definition that he gives, that Lauro will give to philo-fiction, right? It's the genre parallel to science fiction, and that it lowers dogmatics and philosophical axiomatics to the state of a fiction. And this has to do with the attempt that Lauro, the encounter that Lauro has when trying to do philosophy without the accordance of the principle of sufficient philosophy, without the kind of the sufficiency that philosophy has. When you kind of remove this from philosophy, you have to sort of invent a new way of doing things. And so when he comes up with in between, I think it's in between non-philosophy and non-standard philosophy, philo-fiction pops up, right, as a practice. So in a talk, or when he's talking about theoretical installation, right, these are models of the real as he concerns them. They're theoretical apparatuses, like, for example, when you have photofiction. Photofiction is questioning these sort of methodological answers, like how does an artwork think according to its own modality, and what kind of new modalities can be revealed when you fuse these different disciplines. But as Anne-Françoise already said, this is not a mixture. Mixture is not the word we want to use. We want to consider this a fusion or a superposition. Because what a mixture does is it actually upholds its sufficiency of each point of the mixture, right? When you mix two things, you are taking both of its essential qualities, and they subsist or exist in its final process, right? So it's so photofiction is what is the photofiction, right? It's a camera that you can't see, it's not sold in stores. It's one that has yet to exist, perhaps. And again, here it's this apparatus is a fusion between philosophy and its technological qualities of the camera, right? So these two forces will come together. They're equal forces. There's the democratizing force. However, each one does not have it's a removal of its final, or its closure as an object, or its teleology. So in other words, it's a generic extension of the technology and not material in the technological sense of the world, because we cannot pick it up, we cannot use it, can't see it. So what it does is the means is constructed as a model that suspends photocentrism, right? It takes photography or the photograph as its model, even though it removes this technological sense. So what does that actually mean, right? That means that, for instance, you have to think sort of different about this, where, for instance, in the Black Universe, another fiction that's created, this is a quote for him, but I'll return to this quote at the end, but this is to take, right, as the finalities of black and white as color, right? Black and white, but like their metaphysical entities are sort of removed. And he does a similar thing with photography, where he's talking about he's talking about sorry, one second. When he's talking, sorry, this is what I wanted to say. So in the Black Universe, right, he says, don't think the technology first, think the science first, right? But science is not science as we normally would take it. Science is sort of defined in an inventable way, right? The way he sort of progressively determines this, right? Science is a mode of thought in which black determines the last instance white. And it's sort of a reversal, right? And yeah, so sorry. I just want to go back. So again, we're talking about how fiction sort of, how this specific type of fiction sort of operates, right? And operates according to this quantum influenced idea of superposition. And he does have suggestions in some texts that this non-philosophy and this non-philosophical method, right, has the specificity of a line, I think he says, but I'm changing it to a vector, which has a direction and a magnitude, right? And they can manage to encounter other fictions. So you can actually progressively, and this is something we will try to practice through superpositioning our own fictions between each other, right, is hopefully managing to encounter each other's fictions as we go. And these are supervisions of when you do this, right? Again, this is a proposition or a position he takes. This with the superposition of intentions, attitudes, orientations, all these conditions, right? Which usually would hold a dominant position in its disciplinary form, right? They fail when you end up superpositioning them. No longer can the photographer be the owner of the aesthetic qualities of the photograph alone in photofiction. You have an individual who sort of manipulates the camera as its subject. And then I sort of wanted to add these sorts of things, I think, that relate to abstract concrete, and that these fictions, right, are attitudinal, they're not propositional. They're a position, they're like in fictionalism, right, there's a distinction between saying and commitment, between saying something and committing to something. And I think belief, for me at least, is like a big proponent in the idea of how these fictions work, how these fictions operate in order to create collective intimacy, as we introduced in the course. So fictions can be like a generator of belief, right? They can be based on a set of commitments or positions that we sort of can take into account and to work from. So this is where it becomes like a methodological or kind of a position we must take and to practice this. I wanted to, so to put it in simple words, like if so the fiction is a way of these fictional models, these models of the fiction as a means of sidestepping like these typical frames of references, right, in order to invent or find something that something new. And it's sort of, so if Laurel, like in creating a photo fiction, right, it can be a method. This is a method of art and philosophy, which is not solely one or the other. And he attempts basically to rewrite photography as light writing, right? And so there we have this, that's where we get the I guess the common sense of fiction, right, where he's creating a fictive use of the science of light in order to create this sort of abstract apparatus. And again, these are experimental texts, so as they have been developing, they've kind of been getting a little clearer. But again, it's very difficult to kind of, one of the questions that I end up that I hope we can flesh out or get some traction on, right, is these non-material abstract concepts, these photo fictions, right? In practice, how can we implement these things? How can we help along its movement from the abstract to the concrete, for instance, or concretize them? And also the general question is like, what does it do, right? What does it do? It's constantly the question that we get as well. Like, how do we do this? What are we doing? And so we hope that, again, this is like, yeah, general idea of fiction, but we hope that when we show you different ones and you practice them and then hopefully invent and bring your own fictions to the table, that we will be able to kind of explore this method as sort of an implementation that kind of asynchronously communicates between both abstract and concrete. And just with that, I just wanted to kind of give a very easy briefing of a fiction, because we have Anne-Françoise prepared a fiction specifically for this course. And without that introduction, maybe it will just seem odd as an odd narrative. But now let's think about sort of like the experimental use of this as we listen to Anne-Françoise read this fiction of Russell. No, yeah, this fiction she prepared, not Russell. Sorry. So I'll pass it to you, Anne-Françoise.
Yes, yes.
And then we will have a better
yes.
discussion.
I can read a fiction, and I encourage you to create fictions in your disciplines. Now, my fiction, Philosophers in the Grip of Abstraction. The golden calf of philosophers is the principles of abstraction. When we have a symmetrical and transitive relation, the class of objects which have with A the relation S replaces in the calculations the property common to all these objects, which is assumed by common sense. I do not deny that there is often such a property. Ah, says the philosopher, this property is the concept, finally something we can deal with. But the mathematician replies, I do not deny that there is often such a property, but is it not necessary to introduce it into the calculations? It would be in general indefinable, and the class has all the qualities one needs. These are citations of Russell's letter to Coutura. But the artist is amused. How can the philosopher believe that a horse is similar, so symmetrical and transitive property, to another horse? This supposes that one can count 1 horse, 2 horses, perhaps 3 horses. How in art can one represent the property that is common to them? The color, the elegance, the trot, the sharpness, and so many other qualities, of which one can qualify so many other living beings, cats, dogs, for example, and why not the bipeds without feather, Plato would say, but also knives and swords. The artist Benoît Maire answered to the philosopher something that this last one has doubtless difficulty to put in concept, even simply to hear. Un cheval des silex. It is the title of his books, Un cheval des silex. For the artist, concepts are not enough. There must be circulation. Citation. Aesthetics is a system that connects the perception consciousness of one subject to that of another by means of crossings during which there will be transfers of weight. Aesthetics can be understood as a fluid mechanics where weight circulates between different people and is mediated by objects and experiences. A piece of plexiglass, for example, can be both a sculptural object and a textual object. Art become weight, object, text, installation, sculpture, and if one seeks to apply the principle of abstraction, what is common to them will be, for the philosopher, the concept, which he transforms into aesthetics without concept teaches him Kant, but nevertheless abstract, even if it brings us to see the beautiful and the sublime in order of magnitude and harmony or disharmony. Even if Derrida will have taught him that the concept is a chicanery, the philosophy will have difficulty classifying this diversity and will not be satisfied. Not to mention that the specialist in fluid mechanics will let him know to what extent observation, rather than the concept, is necessary to his discipline, equations that are only valid for particular cases, the slowness of honey rather than the speed of water, but models and modeling to be constructed, which do not quite respond to the abstraction and construct perhaps by abduction a new concrete. The philosopher believed that abstracting and counting could be done together and combined. The non-philosopher teaches the philosopher that one does not pass so easily from the one to the two. They are not of the same order, or rather they suppose an order that escapes counting, the empty and generic one, the two full of diverse worldly meanings. And he would say friendly to the artist with his term of philosophers become materials. It is not the hose which is abstract or concrete, not the flints, but the passage of the one to the multitural. Ah, the vectors, either identical or separated, and without being able to find themselves according to the Deleuzian line. Because the real is first, it is not at the end of the infinite line. Thank you.
So just quick comments before I want to open it up to everybody is like just to sort of like reiterate some of the things that I said. You see how in this text Anne-Françoise was able to use the different aspects of philosophical theory, like the different theories of different archetypal philosophical characters, right? And these characters are encountering each other, or which are the events or the progressions created in her fiction. But she's still doing philosophy. She's still doing a philosophical, what we normally would consider, without its disciplinary session. It's a philosophical practice, right? She's connecting these ideas and these thoughts, but it's in the practice of sort of laying them out or sort of connecting them, in which she can invent new ways of sort of thinking about an idea, which breaks her out of, which allows her to sort of like take in ideas from what she knows from art or aesthetics or music, and sort of plays these through. So it's not simply a fictional story or theory fiction. You hear theory fiction a lot too. It's sort of practice is sort of different, and I don't know if that, I'm hoping that comes across, but I want to open it up to you all about questions about this idea of fiction. I would like to say we do not only want you to just write narrative fictions, like for instance like this. You're allowed to use any means that you might have. If you're an artist, you might want to draw diagrams. A mathematician might want to come up with an abstract formula or some sort of formulaic approach. But yeah, and the thing that encouraging and interested in are these different sort of ways of practicing this. But at the introductory point, do we understand what the fiction is and what we might be asking you to do like throughout the course? That's an important question, I think. And now I open it to you all.
Can I hazard a description of a fiction from my perspective?
Sure.
Yep.
So it seemed to me from listening to that fiction that a fiction proceeds less by kind of argumentation from like a point of generality to more specificity, or from a multiplicity of views to a singular view, but it is instead the posing of different views alongside one another without subordinating them to an argument that would reduce the complexity of having those things interacting rather than contesting one another for kind of superiority in the logic of an argument. Is that a fair description?
Pretty spot on. I mean, it's pretty good. It's pretty good in your own words. I think you would hear the decision if you're talking Laurelian, like the fact that, you know, you must make a decision on the position, right? And that is like one of the failures of the Deleuzian postmodernist point, right? Is that you do have this sort of plurality of multiplicity of views, but at the end you don't, like, you kind of, there's no action. There's an action here, right? But one that doesn't, but still, yeah, it's a weird one. It, like what the Deleuzians or the post-Deleuzians kind of end up at is like this multiplicity for multiplicity's sake, and you kind of can't make a decision or a move. Whereas here, because you have the freedom that the fiction gives, you can freely kind of transition between even incommensurable things, right? Even things that you might. And another thing I might say is, fiction is a good approach when well, for one, what Joevenn said, like when things are seem impossible, right? But also, yeah, the fiction is, yeah, it's a way of re-encountering, I guess, these ideas and thoughts. So, and yeah, I hope we can get like a diverse, and we'll practice this like every session, and they don't have to be long or fully worked out or any of these things. This is just an exercise that we would like to do. And Joevenn, you have something to say maybe? I don't know, you're on my screen.
No,
so.
I'm just continuing on what the assignment thing is. So like Tony is going to talk a little bit about what the assignment of the fiction is for today. Yeah, it's just, you know, so like I think every week what we're trying to do is for everybody to write a piece of fiction, a short fiction, and we'll talk more about that in the next session. But don't have too much pressure about the fiction being exactly like, you know, like modeled after what Anne-Françoise is writing or anything. But also understand that, as what Tony has been saying, like there is a level of openness and multiplicity that the platform of a fiction allows us to have, and so take advantage of that. And yeah,
just like springboard off of this real quick, the one thing I wanted to say is, like, you find in some event, I posted in this this drive, I'll have to send it to the email so everybody gets it, but there is some other fictions written that have been published, that Anne-Françoise has written, that have been published by Robin Mackay that I posted. So the Madonna and the Crater and the Philosophical Scripts text that she originally wrote for Documenta are both on there. So you get like this idea of how her experimental genre has been developing. You see like meetings between philosophers that never happened, and what would happen during that conversation, Mike, right? When you have this is so what we're trying to so as a theme for this first, I guess, experimental like practice, like we're just giving you a very basic theme as an encounter. So is to develop a picture that deals with an encounter. And the reason why we bring up encounter, right, is you have the abstract and the concrete, two generally opposites or opposing things, right? What happens? How can you bring these two things together in a fiction? How what might encounter between these? This is a suggestion, not a proposal. The encounter might be, for instance, two philosophers that meet each other, and it's their conversation. The encounter might be I don't know, abstract arts encountering the climate, whatever
Like-
it might be.
Or like we take it on presumption that, for instance, music, if you're a musician, you in your practice of music, you encounter that practice, in a particular way that might actually be very different from, as a philosopher, what I do when I encounter my own practice. So it could be very interesting, if anybody, like, you would want to write about the encounter of your discipline and a fiction of that encounter of your discipline that you could put it in a very like open space. I'm not sure if my words make any sense, but yeah, like
It's just, it's the difficulty in trying to give you a very open-ended prompt without making you guys like just be like, what am I supposed to do with it? What am I supposed to? So this encounter is interpretable. We like you to keep in this idea, try to bring in the idea of either the abstract or the concrete in the work. Remember that it's not necessarily a narrative fiction, so you don't have to follow all the steps. And I'll try to also this week kind of keep posting in that document like some examples of how it might work. I have invented a script. I'll post a script, which is like me and Anne-Françoise kind of, it's about our discussions. We've had discussions before, and I'm sort of bringing them about in like a film script. So the form is up to you. And that's like the interesting challenge, I guess, or that's the interesting challenge, I think, for us, is to see how we can to like encourage all of you to do it.
yeah, and sorry,
and we're
one
gonna
last-
kind of
sorry,
go ahead.
one last thing. So like the fiction that you write, like instead of
draw
writing
or-
like fan fiction between like just two random philosophers, like the very aspect of philosophy ought to be concrete in the work. Like, so for example, when you're talking about like encounter, right, like you can say like as a musician or like as a geographer, like you're encountering something very quite specific, and you can like fictionalize that encounter, for example, or like two philosophers that encounter each other. But the encounter is not just you meet at a bar or whatever. Like the encounter like captures something concrete in it, right? Like, and so that concrete can be like fictionalized. I hope I hope these words like give better sense.
Yeah, that's good.
The concrete,
Sorry, I have a question. Just the text that Anne-Françoise just read, is that going, like, can I access that in written form, either in French or in English, first of all? And okay, cool.
Oh, sorry. If you read
and I
French, I recommend
translated
version,
by
but-
Tony.
Okay.
yeah, roughly translated.
Yes. Yes.
And I guess this seems like a very basic question, but I don't know if we have time for this. But if it's possible, like fiction as a word is like a pretty general thing to me. So I'm curious, like, what is the definition of fiction for each of you, as opposed to how it's like colloquially sort of referred to? I'm like, just as a concept, like, is it just that it does not exist in reality, or like it seems important to.
It does exist. It's weird. It does exist. It acts on the world. It might be abstract in its subject might be abstract, for instance. So the subject itself might be abstract, but the actual generation of the fiction, the creation of fiction, is it is. That is like the real part of it, and it's what separates it from like the genre fiction. We're not talking about the genre fiction. We're trying to talk about, I know I have a hard time even just defining this thing for myself. And I've been practicing it this is how I met Anne-Françoise actually on this topic. But I think it's hard to define, but it's best to know through these examples. So as you read Anne-Françoise 3, I'll give you 3 of them. And then maybe I'll give some excerpts from photo fiction. And you can start to see why photo fiction is not sold as like a novel. Not like a general fictional novel. And as Joevenn was trying to say, these things do capture this concrete, something concrete in them. There's that intention to it. I think it's going to be, we have to leave it a little vague for now. And I promise you, the way these courses have always gone with us is the first course is always like, everybody's like kind of like really don't know, nobody knows what to do. Second course, third, everybody gets, we get really, everything starts coming together. So we just ask you to attempt something, even if you're mimicking what we give you in Anne-Françoise. Let's say you're just mimicking a style that she has. That's all we ask. Like, so I'm sorry, I can't answer the question of defining it more than I've already defined it in the presentation. Because because I always end up having just a negative definition. Fiction is not a fiction that you normally see. It's but I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm trying.
And we will unify the fictions by a glossary. We have made a glossary, and we will discuss this glossary. What is concrete for each term of the glossary? And this will made some comments of our different fictions.
Yeah, we'll talk about more practices about the glossary the next time, because we're out of time. But but the fiction is the assignment, and then the glossary is part 2 of the assignment next time. So
yes.
For Bryn's sake and everybody else, I'm sure we'll write. I'll write this assignment proposal out to you all by the weekend. So by Monday, I will send it to you, and it will have the closest I can give you, and then we just ask you to experiment as best as you can. There's no right answer anyway. So and be, bring whatever creative the best advice I can give is try to think about this concept, this idea of the course from your perspective. So Bryn, again, I'm talking to you, but as an example, but the math. So try to think of how mathematicians would encounter this, right? Or how you could encounter this from that perspective, or from a different one outside of that, if you're interested. Like I will, like I'm trying to use computational models. So on how we can, and how, so my fictions are actually by building actual model, like actual computational models and running them. So it's not necessarily a fictional sense. It could be a theory.
Computational models fictions anyways. I mean, that's I feel like that's the sort of definition
of a model. Yeah, but hopefully the way I practice it will be slightly better. But we'll be able to have the slight significant difference. But I think I also posted a PowerPoint from an old talk that Anne-Françoise gave on on fiction as well. So I recommend going and looking at that, and that will also help, I think, on how we interpret this. Yeah. Any other sort of general questions before we close? I mean, I know we started a little late, so ending a little late is okay, but it's okay if we're all in confusion right now. I promise that we'll get more and more concrete as we go.
Since we have like 3 people here, all of you want to like say last words or something before we go? I'm putting you on the spot, but like it'd be interesting to see how you've interacted with this session so far. Juliet, do you want to go first again?
Yes, well, I think I'm very happy to process all the materials you are going to share, but I find this way of just using the methodology of fiction very exciting, and it relates very much with also much of the bibliography I'm reading, like Donna Haraway was one of the ones mentioning science fiction as a mode of speculating, as a speculative mode. So yeah, looking forward to the next session.
Cool. Great. Juliet, do you want to go?
Sure, sorry, Julia, I misheard. Yeah, same. I think I need a bit of time to really process everything and look into it a bit more. And yeah, I'm super excited. That's it.
Bryn, last words.
Yeah, I feel like I have like a lot to go over from the lectures today. So it's opened up quite a few avenues for me anyways. So thank you.
I think I would recommend that we have, well, one thing we could do is have like an email chain, you know, throughout the week, so we could keep small conversations going. It usually helps if you have any, you know, so then you don't feel like you have to wait until Saturday to like bring something up. Feel free to email out. I can, again, when I send out the information, I'll start the chain and we can bring it up. So if there are any initial questions,